This is the new MicroKORG 2 from Korg, if that wasn't obvious. And it is the follow-up to Korg's widely successful MicroKORG. It came out, I think, in the early 2000s, and it was at the time a quite affordable virtual analog synthesizer that was fun and immediate to use, but it was also a little bit difficult to program. It was a great machine for playing presets, but if you wanted to make sounds from scratch, it wasn't all that fun. And with the new screen on the MicroKORG 2, as well as dedicated buttons for the different parts of the synth, Korg has really improved on the sound design potential. It's much more fun and immediate to create sounds on this. But I want to start off by just managing a few expectations. If you're just starting out with synthesizers, maybe you have one or two synths, and you're looking for a digital synth that can do virtual analog sounds, that is easy to program, and that is immediate and fun, then this is a really good option. But if you're like me and you already have a lot of gear, maybe more gear than you know what to do with, which I know a lot of my viewers already have, then the MicroKORG 2 doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you need something portable because it's battery powered, or you want the vocoder, the vocal processor on it. So if you're a more seasoned synth nerd with a lot of synths already, I don't think that the MicroKORG 2 will add a lot to your arsenal of synths, but if you're a beginner or somebody just starting out, then this is an excellent choice. So with that being said, let's take a look at what the MicroKORG 2 is, and also a big thank you to Korg for sending it over, and a big thank you to DistroKid who sponsored today's video. So what is the MicroKORG 2? Well, the MicroKORG 2 is an 8-voice bitimbral virtual analog synthesizer with additional complex digital waveforms. What does that mean? Well, it means that it can create analog sounding sounds and it can create very digital sounding sounds. And the 8-note polyphony means that you can play up to an 8-note chord, or you can split it into 2 timbres, basically 2 sounds with 4 notes of polyphony each. You can sequence these 2 sounds individually if you have an external sequencer. So you send MIDI on one channel to sequence one sound, and you send MIDI to another channel to sequence the other sound. And if you just want to make a small synth setup, using a MicroKORG 2 together with circuit tracks works really well, because the circuit tracks has 2 MIDI tracks that you can use to send MIDI controlling the sound of the MicroKORG 2. So MIDI out into MIDI in. So timbre number 1 is this arpeggio here. And timbre number 2 is a pad, and we can play them together. And I think that multi-timbrality, being able to play these 2 sounds together, is a big selling point. I will note, however, that I've had 1 or 2 bugs. For example, I've had the MicroKORG 2 freeze while I was doing a multi-timbral setup, and I turned on the arpeggiator and it froze. I've also encountered a situation where even though I set the global MIDI channels correctly, it hasn't worked for me. Basically, it's playing back both of the sounds using, say, MIDI channel 3, even though MIDI channel 3 should only be for the second timbre. So I do think that the firmware, when it comes to multi-timbrality, needs just a little bit more work. And when we're talking about the sound of the MK2, I want to be real about it. To me, the sound of the MK2 is good. It's okay, but it's not fantastic. It's not a sound that makes me go, wow, amazing. And here's the thing, the original MicroKORG was never the best sounding synth out there either, but it still found its way into the hands of many artists and into many studios, even though there were better sounding synths out there. The MK2 can, however, do a quite wide range of synth sounds, but just don't expect any grand pianos or realistic string ensembles. The MicroKORG 2 also sports a vocal processor, something which a lot of the competition does not have. You have a vocoder. You have a hard tune vocal processor. Yeah. And a harmonizer. And while it's nice that we get an included microphone, it's not that great. You have to have it very close to your mouth, just like on the original MicroKORG. And I found that I much rather use just a standard dynamic microphone with it. Oh, and a really important thing to note is that when you turn on the vocal processor, you can't actually play any synth sounds alongside it like you can on the KORG Neo, for example. On the KORG Neo, you can layer the vocoder together with normal synth sounds. MicroKORG 2, it's exclusive. Either you use it as a vocal processor or as a synthesizer. Well, technically a vocal processor with a vocoder is a synthesizer, but you know what I mean. And let's talk about the competition for a second. Around $600, there's a lot to choose from, and we have, for example, the Minifreak from Arturia and the HydraSynth Explorer from ASM. To be honest about the fact that I do think that both of these synths sound better than the MicroKORG 2, but the MicroKORG 2 with its large colorful display makes it a lot easier and more immediate to use. It's an IPS LCD screen, it's quite readable at an angle, it's quite easy to see what's going on. And then we have something a little bit different, it's the loop recorder. This is an audio recorder, so you can record the internal sound, you can also overdub into it, you can record from the microphone or the aux input. But as far as I know, you can't save anything that you've recorded into the loop recorder. It's basically just there while the device is on. When you turn it off, it disappears. And here I've recorded a pad, a bass, and a lead sound into the loop recorder. You can record up to 128 steps, so you can record a pretty long loop. I'll be honest and say that while the loop recorder works great, it works as intended, personally I haven't found great use for it. I think it's mostly for capturing ideas very quickly, but since you can't save or export the loops, it's a little limited in its usefulness. But a good thing is that you do have an undo function. So if you record a loop, then overdub it and you're not happy, you can always undo that. And there's also a stutter effect for the looper, but oftentimes it just ends up not sounding that great, and I'm not sure what I'd use it for. Oh, and a cool thing, if you change the tempo, the loop is actually pitch shifted to match the new tempo setting. And on the back of the unit we have full-size DIN MIDI. We have a condenser input for the included microphone, a dynamic input as well if you want to use your own microphone. We have a stereo aux input, a damper switch, and yeah, the aux can be routed through the effects as well as recorded into the little looper. And we have the left and right output as well as headphones output, but there's no independent control of the levels. And then we have the USB, which is mostly for MIDI, and then power and the power adapter input. And another cool thing is that you can battery power this synthesizer. It takes 6 AA batteries. And in terms of overall build, it feels pretty good actually. There's some aluminum over here, I think, and the rest is plastic if I'm not mistaken. The keys are, as you can see, very small, and if you have large hands, it will be a problem playing them. And the big knob has a very satisfying click to it. This lets you select between different music styles, genres, and I think they largely kept it to keep the design in line with the original MicroKORG, because organizing and selecting presets in terms of genre is, I don't know, it feels quite dated. It doesn't feel like something that people do nowadays a lot. And for each genre, you can press the bank button to switch between 4 different banks. So we have classic sounds, modern sounds, futuristic sounds, and user sounds. Then we have the main knobs that you use to edit your sounds, and these buttons that let you access different parts of a patch, the voice, the mixer, the oscillators, the RPG, and so on. Then we have 3 different kinds of effects. So you have different reverbs, different delays, and different mod effects. There's also a compressor in there, for example, and then a master EQ. Now, since you're here watching a synth video, chances are that you are actually making some music and you want to release it to the world. And if you do, you should check out today's sponsor, DistroKid. Here's 5 reasons to try out DistroKid. Firstly, you sign up for about $20 a year and you can upload unlimited amounts of music. Secondly, it's really quick and easy to upload. Basically, anyone can do it without any prior knowledge. 3. There are different tiers of subscriptions, so if you want to release your music under, say, different artist names, or if you're starting a label, DistroKid has an option for you. 4. DistroKid lets you upload to relevant stores and streaming services such as Spotify and iTunes, and it doesn't take long for the music to be available in the stores. 5. There's also the hyperfollow feature, which automatically creates a custom page where people can find out where to buy or listen to your music, and I personally really like this feature. So go and check out DistroKid using my link in the description. You get a little discount and you support the channel. One of the biggest strengths of the MicroKORG 2 is that it's very easy to program a sound on. So I'm gonna set myself a goal. I'm gonna try and create a pad sound, but with an arpeggiated sequence running underneath it. So to create a sound from scratch, we go to the user bank here and we select an empty program, and we go to the voice menu here and we change it from single to dual, and suddenly we can jump between 2 timbres. So 2 timbres means that it's 2 different sounds with different filter settings, mixer settings, amp envelope settings, and so on. You can treat them as 2 totally different sounds or just layer them for one big sound. An important thing to note, however, is that when you split a sound into 2 timbres, you split the polyphony. So there's 8 total polyphonies. You can play 8 notes at one time, but if you split it, it's 4 notes per timbre. Then we hold down the timbre button and we make sure to use this knob here to turn down timbre number 2's level, because we don't want to hear it at the moment. Here's also timbre panning. Then we go to the mixer and we turn up oscillator 2 and 3. So there's 3 oscillators per timbre. And then we start detuning the oscillators. And we'll go to oscillator number 2 and we turn it down an octave. Next up, I want to set up some tuning instability to mimic a more old school sound, and we do that by going to patch. So patch here has 6 mod matrix slots. It's basically a way to connect a source, so like an LFO, an envelope, to a destination, something that you want to modulate, something you want the synth to turn the knob for you. So here we can set LFO number 1 and we can assign it to timbre pitch. And we can go totally crazy with that, but that's not what we want to do. We just want a bit. Instead, I go to LFO number 1, set it to sample and hold. I smoothen it a bit, so that smoothens out the waveform, the random waveform of the sample and hold. And when we set the speed of the LFO and the intensity just right, it just gives a subtle pitch change. Not like that. It's not an in-your-face kind of modulation, it's just meant to add a little bit of randomization here to the sound. Next we take LFO number 2, we modulate oscillator 1 shape, and we set up the same modulation, LFO 2, to oscillator 3 shape. Now something we can also do is we can bring up a scope to see a representation of the waveform here, which is kind of neat. Next up, I'm gonna set up the amp EG. So we go here, and here we have a nice graphical, if we turn off the scope, nice graphical representation here of what's going on with the attack, sustain, and release. We also have velocity control here for the amp envelope. So set up a pretty long attack, a lot of decay, some sustain, and some release. That's kind of nice. We turn on the reverb, and you just do that by pressing on, and then the effects you want to turn on and off. You can also bypass them for the different timbres. And here we can press reverb, and we can set it to hall, quite a long time, some depth, and we can dampen it a bit. And sounds pretty good. And a thing to note is that LFO number 1 has smoothening, so it smoothens out the waveform, making it a little bit more organic maybe, especially if you're using the random LFO. And then we have LFO number 2, it doesn't have smoothening, it has a delay. We can turn that on. That basically means that when you press down a key, it takes a little while for the modulation to happen. Just waits. Now, since we've set up the amp envelope, we're going to use that to bring in noise also over time, because the amp envelope is slow. So we're going to use that. So we're going to set up a new modulation. So we have amp EG, noise level, intensity, and then we turn it on. So the more intensity, the higher the noise level. So we have it at a pretty high level, just so we can go here and listen to it, find something we like. So it's just like a background noise, and we go back and we turn down the intensity. And as you can see, the menu system is very well designed. When I'm jumping here between, I'm not going to oscillator 1 just because I pressed the oscillator button. I'm still on the noise oscillator. So if I'm going to go back to the patch, I'm still on the 4th patch where I was setting up the noise level modulation. So this is a fast workflow. It's well thought out. It feels organic. Next up, we're going to introduce the filter. So press here, press again. We go to the filters page here, and here we have different filters. So we have low pass filters, and we turn here, you can see on the graphic that we turn into band pass filters and high pass filters. Now I will say that I don't think that the filters on the MicroKORG 2 is particularly great. I think that once you crank the resonance, it's not a particularly beautiful sound. Let me show you here. But I don't know, I don't think it's a particularly great sounding emulation of an analog filter. I think that, for example, Korg's own King Korg Neo does the filter emulations a lot better. It has a very nice analog sounding filter section, whereas this is just okay. So we shave off some higher frequencies, introduce some resonance, and we go to the filter envelope, and there are only 2 envelopes. This is one thing I don't like with the MK2, and that is that there's only 2 envelopes. There's the amp EG and the filter EG, and there is no like 3rd or 4th assignable envelope generator. I think that that would have been a no-brainer, just having an envelope that isn't tied to something that we could use for mod routing, for example. And with the filter envelope, we can get very different responses from the filter. And why not set up a modulation between the filter envelope and the filter drive? And I turned down the intensity. So if we go and check here, the drive is at 75, but with this modulation, over time it's turning it down. And why not add in some more effects? So we turn on the mod effect here, and here are different types. So we have chorus, we have flanger, ensemble, phaser, the stuff that you recognize from other synths probably. There's also a lo-fi effect, compressor, distortion, amp simulation. I don't think that the distortions and compressors and amp simulations are necessarily that beautiful sounding, but the chorus is pretty nice. Go for a delay here, we just turn it on, and there are a couple of different ones: stereo, ping pong, tape echo, and so on, reverse, low res. Let's go for the stereo one, add a bit of low cut. There's also a master EQ. That's something I quite like on synthesizers, just having the ability to shape the sound a little bit at the end there if there's something you don't like. So we can, for example, boost the higher frequencies. It's a 2-band EQ, and we can boost the lower frequencies as well. And we can add in some feedback. So this is output feedback. Basically it feeds the output back into the synth itself, but since it's not an analog feedback, it doesn't have that rich warm tone from like a Moog synth, but it sounds okay. Can add in a bit. Save the program, super simple, fast. Now before I create timbre number 2, which will be a sort of arpeggiated bass line that runs underneath the pad, I just want to show you one more thing here. So we have oscillator number 3 here, and it says disable here, and this is mod type. So we can have oscillator number 3 either ring modulate, it can sync, or ring modulate and sync, as well as do phase modulation of oscillator 1 and 2. So this is interesting and a little bit more advanced. This is, for example, for creating those kind of bell-like FM tones. And for this sound that we're creating, there's no real use for it, but it's a good addition. It's a little bit more of an advanced feature. Now let's press here, long press, and then we turn down the level of timbre number 1 and we turn up timbre 2. And we go to the mixer. Oh, first we must go to timbre 2. We go to the mixer and make sure that the 3 oscillators are turned up. We might add some noise as well. And here I want, for oscillator number 1, I want a square wave. We can bypass all the effects if we want to. Let's keep them on for now though. So here we have a square wave. We can fine tune it a bit. Go to oscillator number 2. Make that a square wave, change the shape a bit, fine tune it as well, and let's turn it down. And we can go to voice menu here and we can turn it into mono, and there's mono legato and mono re-trigger. So just go mono legato, and we can turn on unison. So you select how many voices you want here, and the spread. And for the third oscillator, we're not going to use one of those virtual analog waveforms. Instead, we're going to go here and do a one-shot. I just want something transient rich. We're going to set up some quick modulations here. LFO1 to oscillator shape of 2 oscillators at least. I mean, we have to make Nick Bat proud of us. You know what? I think I'll just turn down oscillator 1 here. Another octave. That's kind of nice. Oh, and another thing that is important is that under the patch here, you can actually set up 2 sources. So we're only using 1 here, but you can assign a second one here. Basically the same. sources as the first one to impact one destination. So that's just good to note. So here we're playing around a little bit with the filter and the filter envelope. And now I want to introduce the arpeggio. So if I turn it on, it just plays. And then we have the settings here, ARP A and B. It's not two different ARPs, it's just one ARP, but two settings. And here we change it from both timbres to timbre 2. So it's only affecting timbre 2. And then we have the resolution. We have tempo, swing, resolution. That's pretty good. And now we can use these buttons as well to program a little sequence. You can change the gate time, an octave. And we can change here the type, so up, down, and so on. Gonna turn off latch, and we've set it to random. And there's also the last step, so we can see here we can change the last step. There's also key sync going on. And I think that is about it. So now we hold down timbre mix and we turn up the level here. Not too bad. Now, a cool thing we can do with the sound we just made to make it sound even bigger is just turn on unison and we increase the spread. Now there's a couple of more things I want to show you. If you go here to the voice, or rather assign menu, and here you can set the performance controls that are available under the home screen. So if we go here, we can set, for example, the filter cutoff for timbre 1, and then we have filter, we can do timbre 2 filter here. And that's also very quick and easy to set up. And overall, I hope I showed you that it's quick and easy to create a sound on the MicroKORG 2. And let's just recap a few of the pros and cons. So a big pro is that this is a very easy to use synth. It has a very clear and easy to understand display and UI. It's fast, it's quite intuitive, and it's actually quite fun to use. When it comes to the sound, it's definitely not the best sounding synth for $600, and I actually don't think that the reverb, for example, sounds that great. And while it has a good vocal processor, I think it's a little bit a shame that you can't use the vocal processor at the same time as you're playing a synth sound like on the KORG Neo. A big plus is that it's multi-timbral, so you can make layered sounds or sequence two sounds individually, but I will say that this was a quite buggy experience on the current firmware. Sometimes the synth just wouldn't play back the two timbres using two MIDI channels as the manual states that it should be able to. And while I think that the looper is actually quite fun for capturing ideas, you need to be able to save the loop or export it somehow. At the start of today's video, I said I wanted to manage expectations, because when you make synth videos for a living, which I do this full time, I test a ton of gear. There's a lot of weird expectations getting thrown at you. When I show something on my channel, it's not always because I think that this is the ultimate best thing ever for everyone. Sometimes the synths I test aren't even interesting to me, but I see a value in testing them and showing them to you all because there is a market or a demographic for it. And I always try and balance my content around the fact that I have two quite distinct audiences. I have the hardcore synth nerds like myself who have a lot of gear and quite a bit of knowledge about synths. And then I have all of the beginners, people who are looking for their first synths, just starting out, trying to understand what they should get. And the MicroKORG 2 is definitely aimed more towards that camp. And I think that's so important to get across because we live in a very special time in terms of synthesizers. There's so many to choose from, and there's great alternatives to the MicroKORG 2 as well, like I brought up, like the Minifreak, like the HydraSynth Explorer, for example. Both excellent options, and if you're more of a hardcore synth nerd, I think that those options are more interesting for you. Whereas I think that the MicroKORG 2 is probably one of the best beginner options right now if you just want to start out. Like if you really don't know your way around a synth, it's a great option. So at the end of the day, the MicroKORG 2 is not for me. But that doesn't mean that it isn't relevant to a lot of people. Probably it's relevant to more people because it's not intended for like a hardcore user like myself. It's intended for a broader audience. And I think that's fine too. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, have a great day. Talk to you later.